These simple forms, the ball, cone, cube, and cylinder, you can draw a real picture the very first time you try. Hello, friends. This is John Nagy to prove to you that you can learn to draw by following these simple step-by-step drawing lessons. Let's make this drawing together. Today we're going to draw a snow scene in which we make the paper work for us. We don't have to do too much work ourselves. Let's start 1/3 of the way down from the top left, swing a line way in here, and curve it right back out a little bit below the other third. Now let's put in a line for a hill here, swinging it up across the picture like that. And let's make a roadway curve right back over the brink of that hill. So swing it out, back in, and out again to get a graceful compound curve. Now let's draw a building back here in the distance, and we'll start with a square, place it right on the brink of this hill like this. And we'll turn it into a cube by adding third dimension. Now we'll put the triangular shape on top of that and place a roof over it. But let's cover that roof with snow so that you make the eaves very thick and rounded off like that. So it has quite a marshmallow topping to it. Now let's draw another rectangular shape over here. Bring it down that slope. Add another roof over here with that thick blanket of snow piled on it. Well, now I think perhaps we better put in a hill way up back here and just carry it on across the picture like that. We ought to get a few tracks into this snow, so think of those as having a slight irregularity to them and a sort of a softness, so you can wiggle them a little as you bring them down to the foreground like this. And let's put in still another pair of tracks that sort of crisscross over them, that make a graceful design, as if a sleigh had come down that road and then gone back up. By the way, we ought to soften the edge of the road here like this with a bit of gray tone and then smudge it out. Now you can use your fingertip or a piece of cleansing tissue like this. Just stretch it out a little bit so that you get a soft blended edge. There's something else you can use too, and that's one of these large paper stomps. See how it picks up the tone and distributes it out there so that it gets a soft blended edge to it? Well then too, you know, we're going to have our light come in from the right, down this direction. So this slope should catch a little tone like this, because it turns away from the light, so you'd give it a slight overcast. Now let's erase the line of the hill in the house here so that we seem to plant that house right down into the snow. And since the snow piles up around the house like this, let's bring a little bit up to that edge, perhaps a little higher along here too. With light coming from the right, we'd shade on the underside of this eave and on the underside of that eave. And then we'd get a little shading on the left side of the roof here. Shade the left side of the building. And now let's put a little texture on the end of the house, that clapboard effect. Yes, you can suggest some windows and doors. Let's put in a few windows up here too, and a still darker accent under the eave like that. Let's put in some boards along that direction, a door and a window, and I guess we might as well put a chimney on here. You know, that chimney is a small cube form that sits right on the top of the roof. A little accent under the eave here will help bring out more third dimension to that roof too. Now over along this edge, let's put in a hedge. Let's draw a soft, irregular line like that, and then another one right beside it. Wave that line a little bit. And right below it, bring a line down like this and along the base. Now that is the dark part of the hedge, and the whole top of it is snow-capped. In order to give that some roundness, let's blend and soften this top edge so that we get the feeling of thickness to that snow-capped hedge. Just like that. Now, right behind the hill here, just put in those ragged strokes, always remembering that a pine tree is a rough cone form, and the branches form an irregular, sort of a shaggy effect. And over here, let's put in some snow-covered pine trees like this, with great chunks piling one on top of the other. Pick out the line that goes through them, the line of the hill. Put some shading on the left side of each form, then cast a shadow to the left. Now, if these have snow on them, I guess these ought to have snow too. Now, see how you can put some snow sort of topping on the tips of these trees? Just like that. Well, up here in the foreground, I'd like to draw a mailbox, because, you know, those country scenes are a lot more charming when they've got a little touch of nostalgia like a mailbox. Now, think of that mailbox as being a cube-like form. Carry your line over here and bring this end up. Now, instead of being flat on top, an old country mailbox rounds off like a loaf of bread. Let's round off this end of it, too. And start the line across the top like this. But let's snow cap that also, to give this mailbox a real bit of snow topping. And incidentally, before we put in this post, I'd like to put in some long cast shadows. And the way to put those in is to think of this slope as coming down at an angle like this. You know, the kind of slope that we kids always like to sled on. Now carry it across the road, over these bumps, down into the little ridges, and on up. And let's assume that there's a tree back there that's also casting a shadow. Make that stroke come right on down the slope, into the road, go over the ridges, and drop down into the ruts. So you round those off a bit because the shadow wouldn't stretch straight across. Bring it up this slope and make it climb right over that hedge. Now let's add another branch, casting a shadow here. And going up over, even a third branch. And here's something to do to these tracks. Now where the shadow crosses, it should go considerably darker in there. Give our mailbox a post to stand on. So bring a line down from here and another one right beside it like that. We'll erase this tone in a moment. And now let's erase a little highlight down within the right-hand side of this post. That post, you know, is a cylinder form. So you shade it down the left like this to really make it round out. Remember, our light's coming from the other upper right. Now let's cast a little shadow underneath the mailbox. Curve that shadow down like this. And, of course, you can put in some wood grain and a little texture of bark and so forth. Yes, I guess we ought to add a little thickness to the base of this mailbox. And then, with our light coming from the upper right, we'd really shade this left side pretty dark, like this. Now let's get some overall tone on the front of the box here. Just put your pencil or crayon on the side and work it back and forth like that. Bring it pretty close up to the top, right tight up to the edge of the snow, like this. Down to the platform, like that. And now let's round out this little spot of snow on here to really give it some of that thickness. Once you've done that, put a little thick cast shadow right under this edge. You see how that makes it stand out? Oh, yes, we don't want to forget about that flag on the mailbox. Let's put the flag there because, you know, when you've left something for the postman, you stick that flag up. And that's the signal for him to pick up the mail you've left. Well, I guess we better put in some sky tone up here. But by the way, you know, I bet a lot of you folks recall what a thrill it was when you'd watch the old mailman come by and leave something. It was always a thrill to run down there and find surprises in the box. Now let's make the footprints go back and get tinier as they go back. Yes, by the way, we ought to make little dark holes right down in the centers of those footprints. That really makes them deeper. Yes, we ought to finish the tone of the sky here. And by the way, don't you think things have changed a bit since some of us were kids? Yes, it used to be that the mailbox was the chief point of contact. But But you know, nowadays, a lot of these folks have television. Well, that's about all we have time for, so let's put the frame on. Friends, I just want to remind you once again of something that's going to help you create snow scenes like this. These simple forms, the ball, cone, cube, and cylinder, you can draw a real picture the very first time you try. Hello, friends. This is John Nagy to prove to you that you can learn to draw by following these simple step-by-step drawing lessons. Draw this picture of a New England lobster fishing village. Now, you notice there's an interesting perspective to this, where you're looking down sort of on the tops of the buildings and the boats resting out there in the bay. So I want you to get a straight edge or a ruler of some kind if you feel that you can't draw a straight line freehand. Of course, you want to practice those straight lines freehand, too. But here in the foreground, let's start by putting in the line of the dock, slant it up a little bit like that. Actually, our vanishing point is going to be way up here in the upper left-hand corner. Now, if we set the base of a building, say, here, this line should aim at that vanishing point. And if we put, say, the upper edge of the building in up here, it also should slant up to that point. But what do you say we try freehand in blocking in the vertical lines first? Think of these buildings as being cube-like forms that are setting right on this platform of the dock. Now there you've got a small cube and a tall cube. But the conventional New England building has a pointed roof, so you add that triangular shape of the roof, carry the ridge across like that. Then right on top here, another small cube form straddling the ridge of the roof. Actually, there's a small eave overhanging like that. Now, instead of leaving this as a flat horizontal top, let's make this a slanted roof like that. So you see how we are constructing, just as a builder would construct the foundation parts of his building. Now here we'll set another small building on the dock. Again, make your vertical lines for this rectangular area. Add the triangular shape of the roof. And here again, I want to point out that if you find you can't make those freehand lines aim at that imaginary vanishing point, go ahead and use a straight edge, a T-square, a ruler, or something like that. But it won't be long until you can handle those freehand sketches without the use of a ruler. As a matter of fact, you get more charm in your picture if you do it that way. Back here in the distance, we'll have another small dock just barely peeking into the upper left-hand edge of the picture. And let's put a little tone on the top surface of the dock there. And notice that if you just rub it like that with a paper stomp or your fingertip, you can soften it. Then we'll darken the front edge, suggest some posts, pilings. Later we'll put in reflections. But let's move down here to the foreground, see what we can do with this area in giving it some more solid tone and color. In this case, in this picture, we're going to have our light coming in from the upper left, so the right-hand sides of the forms will be shaded. Let's shade the side of the chimney and the roof also. Then, this side of this small building, the side that's turned away from the light. And the slope of this roof. So you see, by using a chalk on its side like this, you can block in those large areas of tone rather quickly. Now for some tone on this sloping roof and some light tone on the surface of the building here. But you notice there isn't much contrast between the light and dark side. Now you can use a black chalk and you can start putting in still darker tone on the shaded side of this form. That way you get the contrast of the light and dark sides, and it creates the illusion of it's being a solid building. Then the eave would have a dark under edge like that. Shade darker on the side of the chimney. And the same on this building. So you build it up from, say, a gray tone to a still darker tone on the shaded side. This surface of the roof you can make gray. Pretty soon we're going to add some more interest to this picture. Let's think of putting some tone on this dock and suggest a piling here. That's a post. Think of it as a cylinder form. So today we're working chiefly with cube forms and cylinder forms. Now, this chimney, we'll make it just as a flat shape first, but see what happens when you draw the rectangular top and then shade this side of it. Back here, we're going to sketch in some lobster boats. Those are almost like the old double enders. High bow, high stern, and set it there in the water. We might have another one back here also. One of the first things I want to do is use a short piece of chalk on its side and suggest the shingles of this roof. Notice how the crayon does it sort of magically itself. Let's put shingles on this roof also. This one too. Instead of using the black, let's just use the dark gray on this one. Then on the shaded side, we can use the black because where it goes in shadow, it should naturally go darker. Then we need a little shading under this eave and some lines of texture of the boards. The clapboard effect running this way at a slight angle and block in a good dark area to suggest a window. Here on the surface of the building, again, the lines would converge from this imaginary vanishing point, but instead of using a ruler or a straight edge, let's just try putting them in freehand like this. They might not be exactly right, but you'll get a little more charm in your picture if you do those lines freehand. Then, horizontal strokes. Use it black so that they'll show up on that darker shaded side. Blacken in a window. Then a pair of them here. Another window here and a door. All this on the shadow side naturally wouldn't show up a great deal, even in actual scene in daylight. Now let's give some shading to the side of this cylinder form of the piling here and make the elliptical top of the post. Do the same with the small one at the right. Cast a shadow across the flat surface of the dock here. And again, using that imaginary vanishing point, put in the lines of the boards there on the dock. Yes, you might suggest some lobster crates setting here. Tie a rope, let it dangle. But out here we want to moor this boat. Let's put in about 3 posts at random. Put in some shading on the side of the lobster boat. Then an upside-down image, which is its reflection, and kind of shatter that image to make it look as though the water is slightly moving. Do the same beneath each of these posts out there in the water. Shade the side of this boat. Give a reflection. Reflection from the dock. Reflection from the pilings. And it wouldn't be a bad idea to put a little shading on the side of these pilings. A little shading there on the reflection. Dark accent on the gunnel and the hull, might even darken the inside of the boat a bit, and tether it to one of these pilings. Darken the accent right at the water line and in the top edge of the boat. Now there are many other things you could do, such as softening those reflections. Notice with a piece of cleansing tissue, I can soften them like this to get more of that glistening effect of the water. Same with these. And let's not forget to cast a shadow across this dock here. So that's about all there is to it. We'll put the frame on our picture. And I'd like you to take another look at something that I know will interest all of you. Draw these simple forms, the ball, cone, cube, and cylinder. You can draw a real picture the very first time you try. Hello, friends. This is John Nagy to prove to you that you can learn to draw by following these simple step-by-step drawing lessons. This picture of a bucking bronco. So what do you say we get started? We're going to try to capture the action of this wild horse and the rider who is trying to ride him bareback without a saddle. In order to get the feel of the swing of the action, make several practice strokes like that, then lightly sketch in so that you get the top of the neck and the back of this steed. Make it swing down, something like that. Then, rather abruptly, drop it around like this. So there you have the general action. You might make several strokes right over the original in order to get the feel of it. Then we'll draw the cylinder form of the neck, the lower edge, and the cylindrical form of the body. Think of the hip back here as being somewhat like an oval form. Get the sharpness of this joint back to the knee. The leg moves forward then, so supposing you just sketch a line of action. For the other leg, draw a line of action that makes one angle and then another, then a slight angle forward. The form of this is cone-like and tapers. Follows the line of action you've already established, and then think of the knee joints as larger ball-like forms, excepting that they are actually a bit angular when you put in your finishing touches. Now we'll just draw these legs down to the ankles at this stage, and we'll develop some more part of the action up front here. Supposing we put in the jaw and forehead, taper the front of the animal's head, the underside like that. It drops off rather bluntly, but since this is a wild horse, let's have him sort of snarling. Cone-like shape for each ear. Think of the shoulder form here as being a rather large oval form chunk. Then the front of the other shoulder over here on the far side. Supposing you locate about where the knee comes and where the ankle and the bottom of the hoof. So sketching in some action to establish the direction of this foot, think of this as a tapered cylinder form, enlarging at the joint, tapering thinner, then widening here just before the ankle, and then the hoof. We might as well put in the hoofs on the hind feet now. Notice that the ankle gets slim below this ankle joint. The leg on the far side is also a tapered cylinder, begins over there, and we'll make it appear from behind the head here so that the joint of the knee shows right about there, then to the ankle, then the slender part of the ankle and the hoof. So you've constructed a horse by using cylindrical and oval-shaped ball forms. Yes, later we'll do more to this tail, but to give action to it, you might use a piece of chalk or pencil on its side to at least start swinging in the sweep of action of the tail of the wild bronco. Now, in order to put our cowboy up here, let's think of a cylinder form for his leg, bending down at an angle, there at the cuff, rounded off, the waist, and more or less wedge-shaped rectangular form for the body from the waist up to the shoulders. Then think of your shoulder forms as having some mass of form like that, and a cylinder of the arm reaches out here and curves, and the cylinder of this arm curves and reaches forward. He's just hanging on to the nape of the neck there. The head of our cowboy would be an oval-shaped form set on the cylinder form of the neck. The hand in action, and back here you might suggest his hat flying. Think of that as an ellipse, and then a cone-shaped form for the crown of the hat. The pointed shoes, then some wild mane. Notice I've just used a piece of chalk on its side like that. Then you can start using a piece of gray chalk or the side of your pencil to mass in the general tone on the entire body form. If you're just using a pencil, you'll find that you'll have to put it on its side to cover broad areas quickly. Now I'm going to use a black chalk, and I'll put it on its side like this in order to start shading the surfaces that turn away from the light. We'll have our light coming in from the upper right, so we'll shade the front part of the horse's shoulder, make this leg dark in silhouette, shade the front part of the shoulder here, down the front of this leg, the forehead. It's a rather cube-like form with a rather abrupt division of light and shade. Then some shading here on the nape of the neck, and to show this muscle structure, carry a dark mass right on up to join in with the shadow up here, the shadow that would be cast by the fellow who's doing the bronco busting. With a light coming from the upper right, you see his body and legs. This leg would cast a shadow. Then beneath the form, here on the underside of this cylinder form of the body, you can mask the entire surface quite dark. All of this should fall in shadow right on down the leg, and keep the leg in rather strong silhouette. You know what silhouette means. There's no form of light and dark shown, such as we've shown, say, here and in a few other cases. We ought to have a highlight right here on the horse's shoulder. Now, I'm going to use a paper stomp, or you can use your fingertip to do that, but leave a rather high light because of his shiny fur, and you can use a paper stomp or your fingertip for that kind of toning. And the same on the mane. You can also use a paper stomp for putting in shading and tone on smaller areas such as the figure. Shade the front of the face. Make the cowboy's hair fly as if he were just about ready to leave that pony. But he wants to break him in first. But, you know, a lot of these fellas get some pretty rough treatment on those new wild broncs. Now put a little tone back here. Darken on the surface of this leg and on the hip, leaving a light area here and a light area at this joint. Darken the leg. Now you can do more work on that tail. Notice that you can really make it flare. Put in a little softening tone. Shade inside and under the brim of the hat. And you can add other things like, say, give the fellow a plaid shirt, but let's not forget that a bronco that's jumping like this in the corral would probably create quite a bit of dust. So you can have fun just twirling the dust around here. And then cast a shadow on this surface. Remember that the shadow should lie down like that. Then you can softly blend the edge of the dust. And you can even add a corral back in the distance, but that's about all we have time for. So we'll put the frame on our picture. And I'd like you to take another look at something that I know will interest every one of you. Draw these simple forms, the ball, cone, cube, and cylinder. You can draw a real picture the very first time you try. Hello, friends. This is John Nagy to prove to you that you can learn to draw by following these simple step-by-step drawing lessons. Autumn moonlight scene. It's actually a portrait of an old hollow tree. Yes, somebody lives in it, too. All right, what do you say we get our chalks and pencils going and see what we can do in creating a background of mood first. And I'd use a piece of gray chalk just to lightly sketch a circle for the moon. Then a light line, say, across the page about a quarter to a third of the way up. Curved line here, the hill on which we'll set the tree. Now, if you're going to tone the sky around the moon, I would suggest that you put your chalk on its side like that. If you're using only a pencil, place the pencil on its side and just go round and round it. You'll find that, of course, with the chalk, you cover a lot more area more quickly. Then you can make your strokes radiate out from the center. We'll smooth that out in a moment and blend it so that it has more of that sort of pale moon, misty effect that you'll often find on a frosty autumn evening. Broad strokes filling in the sky to a medium gray tone. Now, in order to smooth it out, use a piece of bunched up cleansing tissue when you're working in a large area like this, and just go around that circle several times. Continue. Yes, you can reverse it, go the other direction, until you've worked clear across the page. Now, you can also add another interesting effect by making strokes radiate out, moonbeams, cutting across those rings around the moon. Now, if you want to straighten up the edges of the circle, use a piece of kneaded eraser like this and just pick out the little touches. Of course, that's something you can always do later. You can correct the shape of your moon. As a matter of fact, you'll find that you can even trace around a circular object in order to make a good round circle, but it doesn't have to be perfectly round in order to make a good picture. Then down here along the horizon line, let's just suggest shrubbery, sort of misty back there in the distance. Not too prominent. And here, let's put a little cabin in the woods, or in the clearing, let's say. Triangular-shaped roof, and then a sort of a lean-to section, the kind of cottage that the old coon hunter lives in. Might be down in the piney woods, it might be in the remote area of almost any state in the country. Now for shading, remember your moonlight is coming from back there, so you'd shade the back edge of this building like this. Put in some strokes on the roof, a little chimney, a few windows, and then a few touches such as small trees way back here, very lightly, sort of a wispy lacework of rhythmic strokes to merely suggest the trunks of trees in a row back there. Coming closer to the foreground, we might put one in here and a still larger one there beside the cottage. You can put in foliage by putting a piece of chalk on its side like that and just sort of making an irregular umbrella-like cluster of foliage at the tops of these branches. Now for the closer trees, you might want to switch to a darker chalk or black to make those trees come forward a little more. But don't hesitate to soften them because you want to keep them back in the distance. That softening we call aerial perspective. In other words, they're not as sharp and clear back in the distance as they'd be found up close in the foreground. Then here in the foreground, let's put some tone on this hill. And with the light coming from that direction, think of this hill as a ball-like form. So shading would start at the lower edge and blend up into the gray, converging toward that focal point of the moon. Then a touch of blending to fuse those tones together. Later, after we put in our portrait of the tree, we may do a little more. But I'd suggest that you block in an old rail fence here to start giving it the authentic look of a country scene. When I say build a tree, I want you to think of each segment as being a cylinder form that tapers. Now we're going to start the trunk of the tree slanting like this. Think of the roots as being cone-shaped forms, digging here into the earth to support that giant tree. Carry it on up a little distance. Now we're going to make the cylinder form change direction, and then change direction again. Remember that the trunk and branches of trees are not solid, not parallel cylinders, but they do taper, smaller as they go up. Let's attach another cylinder form here, make it bend interestingly, and curve up. Let's put one in here that comes from the other side of the tree, bends down and up, so that we give this tree some character. Might do another one over here attached to the front of the tree. So this branch comes out of the front, that goes out the back, this one comes out the front. Now let's put in another one here, growing out of the front side, so that we make this cylinder form run up here at an angle, curve. Now you can make your branches go whatever way you wish, but be sure that you get character and ruggedness in your drawing of the tree. Then here's the secret of giving it the look of third dimension. Taking a piece of black chalk on its side remembering your light's coming from back over there, you shade down the side opposite from the light. Notice that it blends off toward the center of the tree. Now this branch would be hidden in shadow, so you could make this branch completely solid. This one would get shaded on the left, and because the moon is above this one, you'd shade this one on the underside, so that light falls on the upper surface of that branch. Then suggest some wiggly branches coming out from there, probably several more. That's something you can do inventing your own tree. You study old apple trees or sycamore trees, live oaks, certain types of willow, and you'll find that they have some very interesting character to them. And we're going to put a place here where somebody lives in this tree. Now for some texture and shading so that we round out the big tree and give it the look of that irregular bark effect. Texture is something you can always add later, and you can really go to town on working texture. And the best thing to do is study the bark of trees, just to make sure that you get realistic looking texture. Then we might have a branch come down here and across the moon, and perched right on that branch, old Mr. Owl, and somebody else lives right inside here, too. Well, that's about all we have time for on our portrait of the tree by moonlight in the autumn. And I'd like you to take another look at something that I know will be of interest to everyone.